If you have over $200,000 sitting stagnant in your bank, retirement account, or home equity, then you're literally losing money. On this show, you learn how to get that money working for you consistently and conservatively. Learn to grow your nest egg with your host, Sean Winslow. Let's dive in.
What's going on, everyone? I'm Sean Winslow, and this is the Multifamily Money Podcast. On today's Finance Fridays episode, we're going to be talking inflation. I know, really stimulating conversation. I hope I don't lose too many of you, but I think it's very important to talk about inflation with all that's going on in the world. We've obviously seen prices go up across the board on essentially everything we're buying. From, we've heard many stories from lumber going up 10x all the way to, semiconductor shortages. It's just been crazy. Used car sales. Essentially, you could have bought a car 3-5 years ago and sell it back and not lose any money, maybe even make some. It's pretty insane. So this is something I think is really important. But before I get into this, just a little housekeeping as always. I really appreciate everyone who's listened. The numbers keep going up and up beyond, kind of my dreams when I first thought of launching this podcast. I thought it would be a lot slower gaining traction, but I just want to thank you all because it's been going up every month, and it makes it rewarding for me with all the research and time I put into this and getting some great guests on here to interview as well. So if you're finding any value from this, please share with a friend, just one friend. That's all I ask. Someone that you can think of that could also get some value from this. I'd be greatly appreciative of that. All right. So on today's Finance Friday, like I said, we're talking inflation, fun stuff here. So one of the major stats or figures that comes out of inflation that everyone in the finance world talks about is CPI. And what that stands for is Consumer Price Index. So essentially, they pool a basket of prices of commonly purchased goods to come to a figure of a price for where prices are for those consumer goods. And then they track that and they see if it's increasing or decreasing. So if it's increasing, that's inflation. And technically we see inflation around 2 to 3%. In the past years, it's not even really been that. It's been quite muted. But 12 months from today, as I'm recording, in October, the last number we saw came out in September. We're seeing CPI, so inflation at 5.3%. That's really high. And I think a figure that's more important than CPI is PPI, and that's the Producer's Price Index. So think of the producers who are producing the goods that we're buying. So, your manufacturers. And that is up 8.3% over the last 12 months. And the thing about PPI is it's a leading indicator of what CPI is going to be in the future. So that this is something that not a lot of people talk about, but it's very important to look at because it's going to essentially predict where that CPI number is going to be in the future. So where the prices are going to be for you and I in the future, how it's going to affect us at the store. So I think it's very important to look at this. And on top of that, think of where we are in terms of the time of year. And like I said, I'm recording this at the beginning of October. We're coming up to the holiday season. And we know how crazy things go in the holidays, people buying gifts. This is the season for those retail stores. This is where their large portion of their volume is made. A large portion of their sales and profit is made is during this time of year. And we've already seen how fragile our supply chains are. And I have a feeling this is going to even severely hurt them even more, could even get close to crippling them with how much demand is going to even increase because it's already at crazy high numbers, the demand, and it's going to go even higher for this coming holiday season. So I'm quite worried about that. And on top of that, obviously the pandemic has really revealed the weaknesses of our global supply chains. The pandemic has really exposed them, that kind of that they were there all along and they're just kind of exacerbating them. And what we kind of seen over the last, almost 2 years now is when the pandemic happened, it created new consumer spending habits. People no longer could travel. They no longer could go out to restaurants, bars, meet up with people, pay for that type of experience. They had to use their income in other ways, their disposable income in other ways. And so this led to a lot of people spending their money on goods and also more space, hence the mass migration to secondary and tertiary markets where there was more space in the housing market, where we saw that explode. On top of that, Americans saw an increase in their take-home pay due to the stimulus. Like there was people making more money from the stimulus that they were prior to the pandemic, which is a whole other conversation of where wages need to go. And then this just created even higher demand for those goods because now people had more money and they couldn't go out and hang out with friends, they couldn't travel, couldn't go to restaurants, bars, so they just spent it on more goods. And what really made it even worse is that at the beginning of the pandemic, manufacturers reduced and even in some cases completely stopped production because everyone thought the sky was falling, the world is ending, no one's going to want to buy, no one's going to have any money to buy because they can't work. So that's just really exploded the issue. And we've seen that, like I mentioned earlier, in lumber. We've also seen it in cars, semiconductors, and furniture, just to name a few, where the whole supply chain, is out of whack. And another thing, I was just in California for a friend's wedding last month, and I saw gas prices up to nearly $5 a gallon. Now, for those of you out in California, you've obviously seen that before, but in other parts of the country, that's crazy. And this doesn't only affect us at the pump, but it'll affect whatever you purchase. Whenever you purchase something that uses fuel in its supply chain, whether that's from producing it using fuel or shipping it, which is essentially everything. So we're going to see price increase from that as fuel continues to increase. And then just looking at food, as food isn't obviously a necessity, we need food to survive. This is going to really hurt food as well, because as fuel goes up, it's going to cost more to ship it to us and also in some instances produce the food as well. And then I was recently reading a report that the price of fertilizer is going up. So fertilizer is used to grow certain food as well in the whole agricultural space industry. So that's going to increase your grocery bill as well. So is inflation transitory? I think what I just laid out there kind of argues against that. We have seen some things, right? Lumber has retreated, but a lot of experts are saying we're like this whole supply chain issue is not really going to fix itself for 2 years about. It doesn't seem very transitory to me. And I think it could even go longer than that. And for instance, if we look at, off the coast of California, there's 145 ships with over 500,000 shipping containers just waiting to unload. And experts say that if actions are not taken by governments across the globe, this could lead to a global recession. So let's hope we don't get to that point. But yeah, what's going on with the supply chain, increased demand in goods that didn't have this demand before because spending habits have changed, has really put a strain on the economy and on supply chains, and has led to this increase in prices because, as we all know, basic economics, supply and demand. So just want you to think about that for a second. So inflation goes up. Dollar you have now does not go as far in the future, meaning that $100 if you were to keep $100 in your bank account, what you'd be able to buy today at the grocery store would not be the same what you'd be able to buy in the future at the grocery store with that $100 as inflation goes up. You'd be able to buy less. And, banks get this. Look at a bank. You deposit your money, you deposit $1,000 into a bank. That's your money. They're obligated to give that back to you at a time when you so want it, and you want to make that withdrawal. That's a huge liability for them. Because what if inflation goes up? inflation goes up and technically, let's say it's 10% over a period of time. So now that $1,000 is technically, 1,100 in inflation adjusted dollars. So they got to pay you that back. They can't just leave it in cash. So what do? They go lend it to people like me, other real estate investors, and they charge us to lend that money. So one, they're doing that so they can protect themselves against inflation when they have to pay you back the money you saved with them. And then two, anything above that, they make a profit. Think about that. Cash is a liability for a bank. Cash is a liability for a bank. And it's a liability for you too. And when that kind of light bulb went off in my head a few years ago, it was a turning point. It's like cash is an enemy if not used properly. You're gonna lose money. As Robert Kiyosaki of Rich Dad Poor Dad says, is those who hold cash are losers. And not that the person themselves is a loser, but that they're losing money by keeping it in cash. So what do we do about this? How do you protect yourself against inflation? And I went over this. It was a small part of episode 15 where I said why I like multifamily. So one thing you can do about this is buy income producing assets. And obviously, title of the show, Multifamily Money. I love multifamily real estate because it produces income. And I just want to go over quickly there's three main benefits or three main ways that multifamily hedges against inflation, and why I think everyone should have exposure to real estate, especially real estate that produces income in their portfolio to protect themselves against inflation. All right, so let's get into this. So first, inflation transfers wealth from the lenders to the borrowers and from the savers to the debtors. Cash flowing real estate investors get the benefits of their tenants to pay all their mortgage interest and then pay down some of the mortgage principal, and if done right, covers the expenses and pays you some on top of that, which is known as cash flow. And let's be honest, we're all here to do it right. So we're going to create cash flow. So the first way that hedges against that real estate, specifically multifamily, hedges against inflation is asset inflation. And we spoke about this before. There's both natural and forced inflation of property. Natural is just over time, property increases. Historically, properties have increased, supply and demand, and other factors just create property to increase over time. And then there's forced depreciation, which we've spoke about in the past, where, for instance, what I do is I buy valued properties. I come in and reposition, both renovate and rebrand the property, which then obviously creates more value in and of itself, but also increases the top and bottom line, which then appreciates the property. So let's say you have $1 million property, and over a period of time, inflation on the property or inflation increases 10%. So then the property also increases 10% in inflation adjusted dollars. So now it's worth 1.1 million. And so now that it's increased to 1.1 million, but isn't your purchasing power down 10%? So isn't everything kind of null and void at par? And the answer to that is no, because you bought it using leverage. At least I hope you did. And the debt you have on the property, you only put down, you only had to put down 200% and the rest, you only had to put down $200,000 and the rest was financed. So that 10% inflation has now increased your equity from $200,000 to $300,000. That's a 50% gain. You're making a significant gain, and that's not even taking into account the cash flow that you also generated from the property and the tax benefits. Now, the second way real estate hedges against inflation is an inflation profit benefit you get from the debt debasement. And what I mean by that is, now let's say you have an investment where the debt or the loan on the property is $1 million. And like I mentioned above, currently CPI is at 5.3%. So let's just keep it a whole number. Let's say inflation's at 5%. So over that period of time, there's inflation of 5%. And now after year one, now you only owe the bank $950,000 in inflation adjusted dollars, because they're charging you on nominal dollars because they don't increase your payment as inflation increases. They don't do that. That's just based off of a nominal dollar from the start of the contract, from the start of the loan. And then after year 2, now you only owe $900,000 in inflation adjusted dollars. And then after year 3, you're at $850,000 in inflation adjusted dollars. That's $50,000 profit tailwind. That's keeping a hedge against inflation for you. And as inflation goes up, that tailwind goes up with it. Now, the third way real estate hedges against inflation is inflation in the cash flow. And that's pretty straightforward. As the cost of living goes up, we've all seen it, so does rent. So that's, as rent increases, for the most part, the value is going to increase. You're going to keep your expenses the same. As much as you can, there'll be a little, inflation in some of the expenses, but your biggest expense will remain fixed because that is your mortgage. And like I said, it's based on nominal dollars, what you entered the contract in, not inflation adjusted dollars. So since your biggest payment by far, as your top line increases, as inflation increases, that mortgage payment is remaining fixed. Thereby, your net operating income, your NOI, is also increasing with that inflation. So very powerful to hedge against inflation. And this is one of the many reasons I love multifamily real estate. And one of the many reasons I'm going to continue to purchase during these times and purchase as much as possible, because it's going to protect me, my family, and my investors against inflation. And this is a quick one today. This is what I want to share with you all. I think it's very important because I don't see inflation as transitory, at least not at this moment. And I see that inflation will continue to rise, especially over the next 1 to 2 years. So if you're not in real estate, I highly urge you to get into it. It's the best, in my opinion. Obviously a little biased here, but I think that's pretty straightforward, what I've said. So if you have any questions, or you want to get in contact with me, as I always say, Instagram is the best place to find me. Shauno wins. So I will catch you on the next one. Thanks for tuning in.
Hey, this is Sean Winslow. After being in the financial service industry for years and having candid conversations with good people just like you, I realized that so many of us are wanting an investment strategy that provides solid returns and consistent income without the bumps in the road. There's little known secret that your financial advisor doesn't want you to know. There is an investment out there that is less volatile and the returns are stronger. Get more details by going to greenbriercg.com and clicking on the free e-report. And by the way, if this show has provided you any value, then feel free to leave an honest written review and of course share it with a friend who needs it. See you next week for another great show.